fear of acting, and now a star who has overcome his fear of interviewers.
Everyone knows it takes a lot to scare Indiana Jones. Not so well known is the private fear of Harrison Ford. The actor hates interviews. It's been likened to pulling teeth without the anaesthetic.
This is one of those interviews that I feel a bit diffident about because...
Diffident?
Yes, diffident, because it makes me feel a bit like a dentist. From what I've read, the patient hates undergoing this kind of treatment.
Well, it's not entirely true. The patient feels responsible for placing himself in these circumstances. He doesn't blame the dentist.
No wonder he gets a bit nervous. Listen to the rotten things they've been writing about him.
Terse and inarticulate.
Oh, that's good.
You like that?
Mm-hmm.
Here's another one. He knows no anecdotes and probably forgets joke punchlines.
Please, go on.
And just to get our relationship off on the right foot.
It's a foolish man who trifles with Harrison Ford. After all, this is the guy who single-handedly saved not just the world, but the entire universe for democracy.
Molaram, prepare to meet Kali in hell. Oh!
A one-man army teaching good old American know-how in developing nations. But he's no sexist. He treats men and women the same way he'd like to treat journalists.
I don't want to go!
Well, most of the people that I now interview say, in the context of their interviews, although I approached him with great trepidation because of his reputation, I found out that it wasn't as hard as it seemed.
No, I'll just get that down. Although I approached him with great...
Although I approached him with great trepidation because of his reputation, I found out that it wasn't as hard as it seemed. And certainly not as hard as Harrison Ford's school days.
I was a philosophy major in college, philosophy and English. And after 3 years, my grade point average had slipped to the point where I would have taken a class in basket weaving if it was available. It seemed the next closest thing to basket weaving was acting or drama class. And so I enrolled in a drama class. And I found at first that I was terribly frightened by this. I had never spoken before people or acted, and I found it terribly frightening. And because I felt challenged by this fear, I continued to do it, because I wanted to overcome the fear.
And so there went the university degree.
Well, the university degree was in great danger even when I started, and in fact, in the next year, I was let go from school 4 days before graduation.
What did your parents say?
All manner of very unhappy things.
Every great acting career must begin with a minor role. His was so minor, Harrison Ford's the only man in Hollywood who hasn't forgotten it.
I can not only tell you about it, but I can give you all of the dialogue.
You can remember it?
Yes, I can. It was paging Mr. Jones, paging Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones?
That's very good. Is that how you did it?
I think so.
Paging Mr. Ellis. Paging Mr. Ellis.
Hang on. Paging Mr. Who?
Paging Mr. Ellis. Paging Mr. Ellis.
Ah, what's in a name? And let's be fair, we are talking nearly 30 years ago.
Bob Ellis. Robert Ellis, room 72.
Tony Curtis, they say, appeared on the screen in a similar part and filled it.
Yes, well, you've heard some anecdotes, so
that you
contrary to your earlier statement, I do know one anecdote. After my first appearance as a bellboy, paging Mr. Jones, I was called into the office of the vice president of Columbia Pictures, who said, "Sit down, kid." He always called me kid. He was about 4 years older than I. He said, "Let me tell you a story." He said, "The first time Tony Curtis was ever in a movie, the first time, he delivered a bag of groceries. A bag of groceries. You took one look at that guy, and you knew that was a movie star. And I leaned across his desk and I said, well, I thought you were supposed to take one look at that guy and think that was a grocery delivery boy. He said, get out of my office.
The career didn't take off, and Harrison Ford turned to carpentry. These scenes, much later from his film Witness, required no acting. This is Mr. Ford doing what at one time he thought he might be doing forever.
You know carpentry.
Yeah. A bit.
Can you do anything else?
And you learned from books, I believe.
I learned from books, and I learned on the job.
And then you established yourself as a jobbing carpenter around Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, my first job was a $100,000 recording studio for Sergio Mendes in his backyard. This is 25 years ago. $100,000 was a big job. Mm-hmm. And Sergio forgot to ask me if I'd ever done it before. I mean, I looked like a carpenter. I talked like a carpenter as far as he was concerned. And I was up on the roof with a book from the Encino Public Library about how to cut in valley rafters, and somehow it all turned out all right, and he recommended me for my next job. I went on for about 15 years.
How Harrison Ford got his big break is one of the classic Hollywood stories. He was rebuilding the office of a big producer. They were auditioning for a movie, and they couldn't help noticing the carpenter.
In walked George Lucas, Francis Coppola, and Richard Dreyfuss to interview for a film called Star Wars that I had never heard about.
Were you banging away during the interview?
No, I wasn't. I just, I said hello, how you guys doing, and went back to work.
It's Princess Leia, sir. She's been trying to get you on the communicator.
I turned it off. I don't want to talk to her.
Later, Steven Spielberg was to say of this film that the real stars were the robots.
I don't know where he is.
Nobody knows where he is.
What do you mean nobody knows?
Well, you said...
Tech officer! Tech officer!
Excuse me, sir. Might I...
Yes, sir?
What about the competition as an actor from the hardware and the technology?
It never occurred to me that I had to feel competition. I felt that we were all in it together, me and the technology and the hardware and the other actors. It's not my function or my prerogative to control all of the elements so as that my human element predominates.
I get the feeling, because you've been there for the long haul, that you're very philosophical about acting.
I don't know that I'm very philosophical about acting. I'm pretty philosophical about interviews now.
Interviewing Harrison Ford in Los Angeles, you get the feeling he'd rather be somewhere else. And he would. Here. The back blocks of Wyoming, where Mr. Ford owns 800 acres of American frontier paradise.
Well, I've lived there for about 12 years. For the last 8 years, it's been our primary residence. My kids are in school there. My oldest son is in school there. We live quietly, simply on a piece of property that's covered with trees and streams and has wildlife, teeming with wildlife. We look out our window in the morning at breakfast and see elk grazing not 20 yards from the edge of the house.
He can also see those magnificent mountains which nurture and refresh the soul, and which are perhaps aptly named.
I'm intrigued by the name of the mountains, the Teton. Well, how do you say that in American?
The Teton.
It's French. Teton
Yes,
is
yes.
what I think it means?
Indeed.
Breast.
Bristol's.
Bristol's.
There's another celebrated feature in the American landscape, the Harrison Ford signature, that landmark scar on his chin.
How'd you get this scar?
Some guy pulled a knife in Detroit.
Really?
No. The truth is that I was in a car crash. I had one of the first cars with a seatbelt, an old Volvo. And one day, I always used to wear the seatbelt, but one day I didn't and halfway through the canyon, realized that I hadn't my seatbelt on, reached around to pick it up, and ran into a telephone pole.
So the truth is prosaic.
Very.
All right, listen up. We have a fugitive that's been on the run for 90 minutes.
Truth is something Harrison Ford says he's pursuing artistically these days. No longer playing the two-dimensional cartoon superhero, but instead the ordinary person rising to extraordinary challenges.
I came home, there was a man in my house.
As in his latest movie, the remake of the old television series The Fugitive, a story of a surgeon on the run, convicted of a murder he didn't commit.
Your fugitive's name is Dr. Richard Kimball. Go get him.
It seems to me that a lot of the roles that you play and that you like to play seem to be a marriage of a man of intellect and a man of action. I mean, even Indiana Jones is also a professor, isn't he?
Yeah, I think that's interesting to play. I think the films that those kinds of characters appear in are the most entertaining kinds of films.
And so the story has come full circle. Harrison Ford now wins acclaim for playing his roles the way he wanted to back in 1966, when a studio boss told him he had no future.
You're playing ordinary folk, and you're playing them like the bellboy, aren't you?
Yeah, I suppose I am. And hoping that people have a little more tolerance for the bellboy than they used to.
Robert Ellis, room 72.
No, sir. Charles Ellis. Room 607.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Paging Mr. Ellis.
You like what you do?
I love what I do. I find it exciting and challenging and stimulating.
Do you plan to become an old man doing it?
I'm well on my way, aren't I?